There is an immense, unspoken power in being the family ghost. While they are busy building monuments to themselves, you are free to study the foundation. You see every crack, every patch of rot, every lie buried in the concrete. My family, the Thornes, were architects of their own image, masters of perception. They believed reality was whatever they could convincingly project. I believed in data, in code, in the unassailable truth of a balanced equation. They thought my silence was emptiness. They were wrong. It was a gathering storm. This is the story of how the daughter they wrote out of the narrative quietly bought the publishing house. The Thorne family's annual Innovation Summit was less a celebration of progress and more a ritual of adoration. It was held in the glittering atrium of Thorne Solutions Group, TSG, a tech conglomerate built on my grandfather's name and my father's relentless ambition. My father, Alastair Thorne, was the sun around which our family planet orbited. As CEO, he was in his element, his laugh a booming command that drew sycophants like moths. My mother, Serafina, was his elegant moon, reflecting his light, her worth measured in the envy of other corporate wives. And then there was my brother, Julian, the golden child, the heir apparent, whose every mediocre achievement was heralded as a masterpiece. Kira was the specter at the feast. At 28, I was the sensitive one, the bookish daughter who worked a quiet little job in data archiving. I wore a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal gray dress, a color that allowed me to blend into the shadows, observing. I was studying the pattern of the crowd, a living algorithm of ambition and fear, when Julian's voice sliced through my concentration. There she is, my elusive little sister. He slung an arm around my shoulders, too tight, pulling me into his orbit where his friends, a pack of preening junior executives, stood. We were just discussing the new AI-driven marketing initiative I'm spearheading. Groundbreaking stuff. But it's probably over your head, Kira. All about big data, you know. I'm familiar with the concept, I said, my voice low. One of his friends, a man with overly gelled hair, chuckled. Don't worry, Kira. Not everyone is cut out for the cutthroat world of corporate strategy. There's a real nobility in preservation. The condescension was a physical weight. Julian squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a warning to stay in my lane. She's always been our family's historian, keeper of the past. Right, sis. Before I could answer, he accidentally jostled my arm, sending the glass of mineral water I was holding down the front of my dress. The cold shock was a familiar sensation. A chorus of faux sympathetic gasps erupted. Oh, Kira, so clumsy, Julian said, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Good thing it's not one of Mom's designer pieces. It can probably be saved, unlike some opportunities. He and his friends laughed. I looked across the room. My father was watching, a faint, disappointed frown on his face. My mother offered a tight, pained smile and turned away. The message was clear: don't make a scene. Absorb the humiliation, it's your role. But as the water soaked through the silk, a circuit closed in my mind. The last flicker of a daughter's hope was extinguished, replaced by the cold, clear logic of a strategist. I didn't wipe at the stain. I looked Julian dead in the eye, my expression as unreadable as a closed ledger. Some stains, I said softly, are permanent. I turned and walked out of the atrium. I didn't hurry. My heels clicked a steady, deliberate rhythm on the polished floor, a metronome counting down the final seconds of their ignorance. I didn't go home to my minimalist apartment to cry. I went to my sanctuary, my command center, and opened a secure channel to the one person in the world who knew who I truly was. The observation phase is concluded, I typed. Proceed with acquisition. Full authority granted. The ghost was done haunting. It was time to execute. My family believed my apartment was a reflection of a barren inner life. They saw sparse furniture, walls of books, and a bank of computer monitors, and saw a lonely, eccentric woman. They never saw the original Eames chair in the corner, the first edition Asimovs on the shelves, or the fact that the monitors were connected to a server handling encrypted transactions worth more than TSG's annual revenue. My mind has never processed the world the way theirs does. Where they see social hierarchies, I see network graphs. Where they hear flattery, I hear data points of insecurity. It was a language they could never understand. The defining betrayal happened when I was 20. I had developed a proprietary algorithm for predictive market analysis. I called it the compass. It could, with startling accuracy, model economic shifts based on geopolitical and social media sentiment. It was my masterpiece. Foolishly, desperately seeking a shred of validation, I showed it to my father in his study. The room smelled of leather and arrogance. "Look, father," I said, my voice trembling with uncharacteristic excitement. "This isn't just a tool, it's a new way of seeing the market. It could give TSG an unassailable edge." He leaned back in his throne-like chair, steepling his fingers. He scanned the lines of code on my laptop as if they were hieroglyphics on a relic from a dead civilization. "Kira," he sighed, with the patience one reserves for a slow child. "This is creative, but the market isn't a math problem, it's a theater. It's about narrative, perception, gut instinct. Julian understands that. He just closed the Atherton deal based on a handshake and a round of golf. That's real business." He pushed the laptop back toward me. "Don't waste your talents on these fantasies." 13 months later, TSG launched North Star, a revolutionary market forecasting platform. It was my compass, with a different UI and a more corporate name. The board hailed my father as a visionary. Julian, who had been placed in charge of the rollout, was given a vice presidency. My father's gut instinct had once again paid off. That was the day Kira Thorne, the daughter, was officially laid to rest. The Sphinx was born. She did not ask questions. She gave answers, and she never ever showed her hand. My maternal grandmother, a sharp-eyed woman who had seen the rot in the Thorne dynasty long before anyone else, left me her entire estate. My family assumed it was a modest sum, enough to keep me in books and quiet obscurity. They never knew its true size, nor that she had instructed me, with her dying breath, to use it to build my own castle, far from their sand. I did. I took that seed capital and, guided by the cold, flawless logic of the compass, invested in a then-nascent field of quantum computing research. It was a gamble that would have given my risk-averse father a heart attack. It paid off beyond any rational expectation. The Sphinx amassed a fortune in the shadows, a digital Midas whose touch turned code into gold. And every single dollar was a brick in the wall I was building around Thorne Solutions Group. A sovereign cannot rule alone. I needed a lieutenant. I found him in Elias Vance. Elias was a legend in certain discreet financial circles, a former hedge fund prodigy who had been publicly disgraced in a setup that reeked of Thorne-style corruption. He was brilliant, ruthless, and harbored a quiet, burning hatred for my family's company. I orchestrated our meeting with the precision of a military operation. He received a cryptic message, an untraceable tablet, and coordinates to a private reading room at the Boston Public Library. He arrived expecting a grizzled, paranoid billionaire. He found a young woman in a cashmere sweater and jeans, sipping tea while surrounded by leather-bound volumes of history. "You're the Sphinx?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "I am," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. I slid the tablet across the table. On it was a complete, multi-phase operational plan titled Project Chimera. It detailed every weakness in TSG, every inflated metric, every secret liability, and a step-by-step strategy for a hostile takeover. He scanned it, his eyes widening incrementally. "This is audacious. The data here, how did you get this?" "I've had a front-row seat to the corruption for 28 years, I said calmly. "They never thought to hide it from the family ghost. The question, Mr. Vance, is not how I got it. The question is, are you ready to help me use it?" He looked from the tablet to my face. He was searching for hesitation, for madness, for the emotional volatility that had doomed so many others. He found none. He saw only a calm, deep, still pool of resolve. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him look truly alive. "They destroyed me to protect less than this," he said, tapping the tablet. "I'm in." Our partnership was sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared understanding of the goal. Not just to win, but to dismantle their entire world, brick by gilded brick. For the next 4 years, Elias and I waged a silent war. We were phantoms in the machine of high finance, using a Russian nesting doll of shell corporations, Atlas Holdings, which was owned by Prometheus Ventures, which was a subsidiary of Ozymandias Trust. We began acquiring TSG stock. We were patient, methodical. We used the compass to predict market dips and TSG's own self-inflicted wounds. When Julian bungled a product launch, we bought. When my father gave an overly optimistic earnings forecast that inevitably fell short, we bought. When the board, loyal to a fault, expressed unwavering confidence, we bought. We were the whisper in the market, the unseen force. The Thorne family, so obsessed with the grand narrative, missed the subtle shift in the subtext. They were the main characters in their play, too busy delivering their lines to notice the stagehands slowly changing the set around them. I attended family dinners during this time, a silent observer at their last supper. I listened to my father boast about TSG's rising stock price, unaware he was praising my own investment strategy. I listened to Julian plan his ascent to the throne, oblivious that the crown was already being melted down. "You're quiet tonight, Kira," my mother would say, patting my hand. "Just observing," I'd reply. And I was. I was watching the final act of their tragedy, and they were all delivering their performances perfectly. The tipping point came when TSG, in a desperate bid to appear innovative, launched a disastrous foray into virtual reality. The compass had predicted its failure with 94.7% probability. The stock plummeted. Panic selling ensued. Elias called me. "The door is open, Kira. They've run into the burning building and locked the door behind them." My finger hovered over the enter key on my terminal. With one command, I could mobilize the entirety of our capital. "Do it," I said. In a 72-hour blitz, we scooped up the remaining shares we needed. The Sphinx, the silent, forgotten daughter, became the majority shareholder of Thorne Solutions Group. The board was notified by a formal, legal document from the law firm of Vance and Associates. They were summoned to an emergency meeting to meet their new benefactor. They assumed it was a foreign investment fund or a rival tech giant. They had no idea they were coming to meet their ghost. The boardroom of Thorne Solutions Group was a temple to my father's ego. Floor to ceiling, windows showcased the city he believed he owned. A massive, obsidian table dominated the room, surrounded by 12 leather thrones. I watched them all file in via the hidden camera feed Elias had installed. My father, Alistair, took his seat at the head of the table, his expression a mixture of irritation and smug confidence. Julian sat to his right, already preening at what he assumed would be his moment of succession. The other board members, aging sycophants and yes-men, murmured amongst themselves. "This is highly irregular," my father began, his voice the familiar boom that had cowed executives for decades. "This Sphinx group has no right to summon us like errand boys. I've half a mind to." The private door behind him, which led to his personal antechamber, swung open. I walked in. The room fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the central air conditioning. I wore a simple, severe black pantsuit, my hair pulled back in a sharp ponytail. I carried a single tablet. My father's face cycled through confusion, annoyance, and finally, dawning horror. "Kira, what is the meaning of this? This is a confidential board meeting. Leave at once." I didn't look at him. I walked to the empty seat at the foot of the table, directly opposite him, and placed my tablet on the surface. Elias entered behind me, taking a position against the wall, a silent sentinel. He spoke, his voice cutting through the thick air. "Members of the board, I have the honor of presenting Kira Thorne, the Sphinx, your majority shareholder." The silence shattered into a cacophony of disbelief. "Preposterous," my father roared, slamming his hand on the table. "This is my daughter. She works in a library." "Data archiving," I corrected, my voice calm and low, yet it carried. "A position that gave me unparalleled access to every financial report, every internal memo, Every lie this board has told its shareholders for the past 5 years. I tapped my tablet. The massive screen on the wall behind my father lit up. Let's start with the North Star platform, the revolutionary tool that increased market share by 20%. I pulled up a side-by-side comparison, my original compass code next to North Star's. The similarity wasn't just striking, it was identical. The patent for the core algorithm is held by Sphinx Holdings, filed 6 months before TSG's development began. This board has been profiting from my intellectual property. Julian's face was ashen. That's a lie, I developed North Star. You marketed it, Julian, I said, my gaze finally settling on him. There's a difference. You couldn't develop a coherent grocery list without a team of assistants. I turned back to the main screen, pulling up new data. Which brings us to the marketing budget. $40 million spent on influencer outreach that resulted in a 0.2% conversion rate. Your team was paying for bots, Julian, fake engagement. The real numbers are here. I continued, a relentless, calm torrent of truth. I exposed the inflated ROI numbers from my father's pet projects, the hidden liabilities in the acquisitions he had championed, the systematic culture of deception that started in this very room. With each revelation, my father seemed to shrink. The great Alistair Thorne was being dismantled by the daughter he'd considered a nonentity. The board members stared at their hands, at the table, anywhere but at me or my father. The company is insolvent, I concluded. Not financially, but ethically, and as of today, it is under new management. The next day, a Wednesday, the entire TSG staff was summoned to the central atrium, the same place I had been humiliated. My family stood near the front, my father and Julian trying to project an air of stoic leadership, my mother clinging to my father's arm. I watched from my father's, now my office. The CEO, a man named Mr. Davies whom I had privately assured would keep his job if he followed my script, took the stage. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. Effective immediately, his voice echoed, thin and reedy. The company is undergoing a fundamental restructuring. The entire executive leadership team, the global marketing division, and the strategic operations department are being dissolved. Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you from the premises. The roar was instantaneous. It was a sound of pure, undiluted panic. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment the Thorne dynasty crumbled in real time. I zoomed the camera in on my family. My father's face was a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. Julian was sputtering, trying to argue with a security guard who was firmly directing him toward the exit. My mother had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. They were swept up in the tide of screaming, crying employees, their badges deactivated, their access revoked. They were just more faces in the crowd now. I picked up my secure phone and texted Elias. The garden has been weeded. They came to my apartment that evening. It wasn't a visit, it was an assault. My father's fist hammered on the door until I thought it would splinter. When I opened it, they poured in, a maelstrom of fury and desperation. You treacherous little viper, my father screamed, his face purple. You've destroyed everything I built, your own family. How could you? My mother wept, collapsing onto my sofa. We took you in, we cared for you. This is how you repay us. Julian just stood, vibrating with rage. You'll never get away with this. I'll sue you. I'll go to the press. You're nothing but a jealous pathetic. I let them exhaust themselves. I stood by my window, my back to them, watching the city lights. When their voices finally faded into ragged breaths and sobs, I turned around. My expression was not one of anger or triumph. It was one of cold, clinical finality. You took me in, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. I was your daughter, not a charity case. You didn't build that company, Father. You built a stage, and you cast me as the stagehand, the prompter, the ghost, but I was always the playwright. I walked toward my father. You took my work, my genius, and you called it a fantasy. You gave my birthright to a fool because he knew how to tell a good joke at a cocktail party. You built your kingdom on stolen land. I turned to Julian. You will sue me. With what money? Your accounts are frozen. The press will have a field day with the data I'll release about North Star. You are a figurehead with no ship. Finally, I looked at my mother. You cared for me. You cared for the idea of a quiet, manageable daughter who wouldn't disrupt your perfect narrative. You were an accomplice to every slight, every dismissal. My father sank into a chair, the fight gone out of him. He looked old, broken. What do you want? Kira, money, the company, you have it, just stop. I don't want anything from you, I said. I already took it. This isn't a negotiation, it's a notification. The world you built is over. The silence that followed was heavier than all their shouting. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting. They left quietly, shells of their former selves. The siege was over. I had won. I didn't hide. The next day I walked into TSG headquarters as its CEO. The whispers were deafening, but they were now whispers of awe and fear. I was no longer Kira, the forgotten Thorne. I was the Sphinx, and I had answers. My first all-hands meeting was a spectacle. I stood on the same stage where my father had held court and my brother had preened. For too long, I began, my voice clear and carrying without a microphone. This company has valued perception over reality. That era is over. From this day forward, we will be a company driven by data, by integrity, by substance. I outlined my vision, a leaner, more ethical company. I announced massive investments in genuine R&D, not the smoke and mirrors projects my father had favored. I dismantled Julian's entire marketing empire, replacing it with a small, data-driven team. Then I delivered the final, symbolic blow. The North Star platform will be open-sourced, I announced. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. The technology was built to advance the industry, not to prop up a single company's false narrative. It belongs to the world. It was the ultimate repudiation of my father's legacy. He had stolen my idea to build his empire. I was giving it away to show how little his empire had truly been worth. The fallout was swift, public, and merciless. The story wasn't just a business scandal. It was a Shakespearean drama. The Thorne heiress who toppled her own family splashed across financial journals and tabloids alike. The data I selectively leaked to trusted journalists painted a devastating picture. Alastair Thorne, the visionary, was a fraud. Julian Thorne, the heir, was an incompetent. And Seraphina Thorne was the enabler who cared more about her seating chart at the annual gala than her own daughter. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation into my father's financial reporting. The lawsuits came next, from shareholders, from competitors, even from former business partners feeling emboldened by the Thorne family's sudden vulnerability. Their personal assets, so intricately tied to the company's perceived health, were frozen. I watched from a distance, a clinical observer of a system in collapse. The mansion in Beacon Hill, that monument to my father's success, was sold to a tech billionaire from California. The summer home in the Hamptons, the scene of so many family vacations where I'd been ignored, was repossessed by the bank. My mother's prized jewelry collection, each piece a trophy from some corporate victory, was auctioned off to pay legal fees. They moved into a cramped, 3-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they would have once sneered at. The silence from their corner of the world was more telling than any outburst. The performance was over, and there was no audience left. Weeks after the takeover, my intercom buzzed. I expected Elia's or perhaps a delivery. Instead, a hesitant, familiar voice came through the speaker. Kira, it's your mother, can we talk? I was so taken aback that I almost didn't respond. The Seraphina Thorne I knew would never have come to me. She would have summoned me. Curiosity, more than anything, made me buzz her in. She looked ordinary, dressed in a simple, off-the-rack coat, her hair lacking its usual expert styling. She stood in my doorway, wringing her hands, a mannerism I'd never seen before. Would you like some tea? I asked, falling back on the rote hospitality she had drilled into me. She nodded, stepping inside as if entering a foreign country. Her eyes scanned my apartment, truly seeing it for the first time. The Eames chair, the first editions, the quiet, confident wealth. It's lovely in here, Kira. I prepared the tea in silence, the clinking of porcelain the only sound. When I handed her a cup, her hands trembled. "Your father, he's not well," she began, her voice fragile. "The stress. The doctors say it's his heart. He sits in that dark apartment all day, just staring at the wall." I said nothing. I simply waited. She took a shaky breath. "Julian, he's gone to Lowe's Angels. He said there was nothing left for him here. He didn't even say goodbye properly." A single, perfect tear traced a path through her makeup. It seemed genuine. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she whispered. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am without all of it." This was the woman who had defined herself by her husband's title and her social standing. Stripped of both, she was a ghost, just as I had been. "Perhaps," I said, my voice softer than I intended, "you can now find out who you are without it." It wasn't forgiveness. It was a statement of fact. But for the first time in my life, I looked at my mother and saw not an antagonist, but a fellow prisoner who had just been released from a gilded cage. At TSG, the transformation was radical. I fired the yes-men and the sycophants. I promoted based on talent and merit, not on who played golf with my father. The culture of fear was replaced by a culture of rigorous, intellectual debate. We became a company known for its sharp, data-driven insights, our reputation for integrity becoming our greatest asset. Elias was my chief of operations, our partnership a well-oiled machine of cold logic and strategic brilliance. We worked in seamless harmony, our shared history of being wronged by the Thorne name a silent bond. One evening, as we reviewed the stellar quarterly reports, the company was more profitable than ever under my lean, honest management. He looked at me across my desk. "They're calling you the Silicon Sphinx in the press," he said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "They say you're ruthless, but you saved this company from itself." "I didn't do it for the company," I replied, looking out at the cityscape. "I did it for me." "And now that you have it," he asked, "what does Kira Thorne want?" It was the question I had been asking myself. The fury that had fueled me for years had burned down to embers. What remained? The call came from my father's doctor. Alistair Thorne had been admitted to the hospital with chest pains. It wasn't a major heart attack, but a severe warning. Against my better judgment, I went. The hospital room was a sterile beige box, a far cry from the opulent settings he was accustomed to. He looked small in the bed, tethered to beeping monitors. The mighty Alistair Thorne brought low. His eyes fluttered open when I entered. For a long moment, he just looked at me. The bluster, the arrogance, the disdain, it was all gone. In its place was a profound, weary emptiness. "You were right," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "About everything, the code, the reports, all of it." He closed his eyes. "I was so busy building a legacy, I didn't see I was destroying my own." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply stating a fact, the way an engineer might acknowledge a structural flaw. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. "I don't want your company, Kira," he said. I need to know why go to such lengths?" I sat down in the chair beside his bed. "You never asked me what I wanted. You never saw me. You saw a reflection, a quiet, unthreatening girl. I didn't go to great lengths for revenge, Father. I simply stopped hiding. And when I stepped into the light, my shadow was longer than you ever imagined." He nodded slowly, a painful understanding dawning in his eyes. The Sphinx's riddle had been solved, and the answer had destroyed him. A year later, TSG was a different entity. We were a leader in ethical tech, a case study in successful corporate turnaround. I had found my purpose not in destruction, but in creation, in building something real and lasting. I stood on the terrace of my new penthouse, a space filled with light and art that I had chosen for myself. Elias was with me, a glass of wine in his hand. The city glittered below, a kingdom I had won not by birthright, but by conquest. "It's done," I said, more to myself than to him. He came to stand beside me. "Are you at peace, Kira?" I thought about my mother, who had started volunteering at a library, finding a quiet joy I'd never seen in her. I thought about my father, living a small, quiet life, freed from the burden of his own myth. I thought about Julian, who had finally and silently sent me a birthday card from LA. The family I was born into was broken, but from its ruins, I had built a life of my own design. The silence I now inhabited was my own choosing, a peaceful, powerful quiet. They built their castle on a foundation of lies and stolen sand, I said, my voice calm and sure. They were so terrified of being small, they never realized I was the earthquake. I am Kira Thorne, the daughter, the ghost, the Sphinx, and my reign is built on unshakable ground.